S21.373, week 1, part 8. Um, what's interesting about the witches here is that a couple of things. It's just a story they're telling each other, and it just lets you know that they're evil. That's basically the purpose of it, right? That if somebody doesn't share their food, they're going to go fucking ruin that lady's life. And there's some witchy shit in there. It was thought that witches could control the weather, so sailors were very much in danger of witches who could create bad weather that would sink their ships. She also says, and like a rat without a tail, I'll do, and I'll do. She doesn't say exactly what she means. She just says she'll do. What's she going to do? You have to kind of figure out that she means she's going to do murder. This is a recurring thing in the play where there's multiple characters in the play who are thinking about committing murder but don't use the word murder. This is going to come up between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth because they both sort of have the idea to kill the king. And they talk about it, but they don't use the word murder because they're kind of just not quite ready to say that yet. They're not quite ready to admit what they're thinking. And so this moment with the witches where they don't actually say the word murder and you have to figure it out is going to come up again later when the Macbeths talk about what they're going to do, but they don't quite say it out loud. This does make the play confusing to read because students are like, wait, what are they talking about? That's why it's better to read a summary of the play first and then read the play, because then you know they're talking about murder. And then and then instead of being confusing because they don't say the word murder, it's like, oh, this tells me a lot about these characters that they don't want to use the word murder. Because to kill the king is like, we'll talk about that later, but it's a much bigger deal than you're probably imagining. Okay. So, and that's it. That's really the purpose of that little witch story. And there's a little witch mythology in there, like a rat without a tail. I'll do, I'll do, I'll do. It was thought that witches could transform into animals. Um, and the idea is that witches, their face would become a rat face, and their hands would become rat hands, and their feet would become rat feet. But because witches, female, do not have a part of the body that was correspond with a tail, if you see a rat without a tail, it was supposed to be a witch because she doesn't have a penis that would transform into a tail. Interesting. Um, so there's another aspect of this, though, that I think is important. Now, some of the things I'm going to tell you are just like facts. Like I tell you shit that's true. This next thing I'm going to tell you is very much debatable. It's just sort of an idea. It's not, I can't prove it, but I just want to point out it's interesting. Isn't it interesting that the witch is mad at the woman for not sharing her food, but she doesn't attack the woman. She attacks the woman's husband. Um, Now, it's possible that that's just an extra cruel thing to do because the husband is the one that makes the money. This will destroy the wife, and the wife will have to live um, without money, without support, without the man she loves, et cetera, et cetera. So it could just be extra mean. But this is a play in which there are going to be women. One way of looking at it is there are women that destroy men. That's not really what I think is going on in the play, but we'll start there. They're certainly going to come to Macbeth and set in motion some things that are going to get everybody fucking killed. Um, so in a play where the witches are going to come to Macbeth and destroy his life, although I really think Macbeth destroys his own life, but okay. But the witches are going to come to Macbeth and set in motion some things that will destroy everybody. Men. It's worth pointing out that the witches don't attack women. They only attack men. So it's possible that the witches only attack men. They don't attack women because they are women. And so it's possible that the reason why they kill the husband and not the wife in this little story about this rando stranger who wouldn't share food, it's possible that they kill the husband instead of the wife because they can't kill the wife, because they can't kill women. They can only go after men. Just like in a couple of minutes, they're going to go after Macbeth and King Duncan and destroy a bunch of people. Okay, cool. Well, this is going really, really well. Speaking of men and women, there's another line I'm going to go over next. This is a line that is almost always ignored in movie versions or plays. They tend not to do it. It's real weird. And so it's something people usually ignore, but I think it's an important little detail that I want to jump on. I understand why movies don't do it. I don't even want the movies to do it. I just want to draw your attention to the fact that it's in the play. So I'm on the top of page 2. Banquo. So Macbeth and Banquo see the witches. By the way, some of Macbeth's experiences, we'll talk about this. We'll talk about it. It's fine. I guess my point is that Banquo and Macbeth see the witches. I think you know that already. So the Macbeth, when Macbeth and Banquo see the witches, in a Shakespeare play, there are no descriptions of what people look like. You have to kind of guess that from what so if someone says, "Oh my, you're very tall," then you know that actor is supposed to be tall. there are no descriptions of characters. Like there's not like a narrator or who describes the characters. You have to figure it out from the dialogue. Well, there's a really weird bit of dialogue on page 2 that's very strange. Um, Banquo sees the witches and he says to them, "You should be women, and yet your beards forbid me to interpret that you are so." Again, most movies do not do this. The movie that you saw does not do this. But apparently, in Shakespeare's day, the witches had beards. Now, first of all, when you think about like Halloween witches, um, they don't have beards. That's a really bizarre thing. Most movies don't do beards, but it's a really bizarre thing. But they do have they're often witches are often old women. When you think about the classic witch with like the pointy hat and the broomstick, they're often old women. They often have like a mole with like hairs sticking out of it or like little hairs. So this tradition of women having beards, witchy women having beards, is a thing. It's just in the modern day, you only just get a couple of weird sprouts of hair here, and like the cartoon. When you think about like the cartoon witch, um, it's an interesting line because the witches are very powerful women. Um, and in our society, you'll often hear very powerful women insulted by saying that they're like men, that nobody would want to fuck them. You look like a man, or they're too masculine. They're not, because society tends to expect women to be caring and nurturing, mothers, etc. And so when a woman is very powerful, I'm thinking here of Michelle Obama. I'm thinking here of Hillary Clinton. I'm thinking of Kamala Harris. Um, these women are often insulted by saying they're like men. There were a lot of sort of racist jokes about Michelle Obama's big arms, or that Hillary Clinton was this sort of it's just she was like a horrible old lady. But it was like it was very like masculine-y, kind of like, what shouldn't she be taking? Why isn't she taking care of her daughters? Why isn't she dressed like a woman? Why doesn't she act like a lady or whatever? So powerful women are often insulted by comparing them to men. By the way, non-traditional men are often insulted by comparing them to women. So Kamala Harris's husband Doug, for example, who is the sort of the first, he's the second gentleman. Usually, you have like the first lady of the White House is the president's wife, but Doug Emhoff is the second gentleman because he is the vice president's husband, which this is the first vice president who's been a woman that we've ever had. And so this is like the media's like, oh, he's so emasculated or whatever. He's like a woman, and people make fun of him, just as they make fun of powerful women for being too masculine or whatever. But you see that here. It's the same kind of idea, because what do beards represent? When you think about them as like a metaphor, think about famous people that have beards. Gandalf, Dumbledore. Who else do I want to go with here? Gandalf, Dumbledore, Santa Claus. The guy from the Bible, God. When you think about beards on men, they usually have it's a symbolic character. Um, they're kind of a metaphor, really. It means sort of wisdom and power. When you think about men with beards, you're often thinking about wisdom and power. God and Santa Claus, Dumbledore and Gandalf are all wise old men who are powerful. Um, so the idea, I think, is that the witches are powerful, and so they have beards. They're essentially been turned into men, sort of. They look like men. It confuses Banquo because they look sort of like men and sort of like women. But I think the point of the beard is to suggest that, like, is becoming powerful the same thing as becoming manly? If a woman becomes powerful, is she transformed into a man in some way, like to have a beard? So it's a suggestion that is in the play, that I think really it's the kind of thing. It's just funny to me that Shakespeare has the witches have beards because they're powerful women, and 400 years later we're talking about whether Michelle Obama or Kamala Harris or Hillary Clinton are like too masculine. And there's other things we could talk about. Gina Carano on The Mandalorian has these like huge arms. Um, uh, yeah. So anyway, but this idea that like, oh, these women are too masculine. Think about famous female sports figures, sports figures who are women. Um, it creates a link, but it says it's Shakespeare's thinking about the relationship between power and gender. All right, I'll see you in the next video.